If you're watching this video, you likely are into startups and think about how to deal with failure. As you know, as a founder, failure is inevitable and you're always trying to fail forward and learn as you go about building your company. We flew to San Francisco to interview the best founders in the world to figure out how they deal with failures and what their most embarrassing mistakes were. We have people who lost $35 million and were given even more money from some investors to continue building their company. These are the most important lessons we learned about failure as a startup founder.
I did military intelligence as a startup. I did 2 semiconductor companies. I helped build a supercomputer company, an enterprise software company, a video game company, the biggest failure I ever had. It left a crater so deep it has its own iridium layer. That's how. In fact, on that one, I was on the cover of Wired magazine with the founding team. Then 90 days later, realized I was going out of business and had to call my mother. And English wasn't my mother's first language, and had to say, "Mom, I lost $35 million." And she always had to translate, a little pause. And she said, $35 million, where'd you put it? And I said, no, it's not like lost, it's like gone. And then she started talking in languages I didn't even know. She said, the country we came from is already gone. We have nowhere to go, and we can't change our name. It's already blank. I said, no, the reason I'm calling you is the people gave me that money, gave me another $12 million to do my next one. And she went, they always told me the streets were paved with gold in America. Now I believe them. And by the way, for those 2 next VCs, after that failure, and this is back to, you're an innovation cluster, I returned $1 billion each to those 2 investors who did the next one. That's not a Steve Blank story. That's the point about an innovation cluster, is that an honest failure isn't the end of your career. Maybe 3 or 4 in a row might be the end of your career, but we get multiple shots at the goal because they're not investing in some theory like a spreadsheet. They're investing in your passion and vision and ability to pull together a team, create a reality distortion field, and potentially build something at scale.
How did you feel in the moment where the 35 million were gone?
Miserable. So I couldn't wait to get up and go to work. Startup is crazy. It was
exciting.
Yes, it was right in my center. But for the first time in my entire career, I started coming home at 4 p.m. and going to bed. And my wife said, that's a sign of depression. And this is when the company was going like the video game company, and it didn't quite go out of business. I sold it to Sega for parts and left, but eventually they shut it down. But it was a failure, and it was on my watch. I was first time ever in my career. I was depressed for 3 weeks, and then I think I told you that story earlier. I was having coffee with a friend who said, "What's your next startup?" And I literally remember that moment. And that's when I raised the money to do the next one. Failure doesn't feel good. People go, whole lean startup is about failure. No, it's not. It's how to reduce failure. And failure is great. No, failure sucks. People describing failure as good obviously haven't had a crater with their name on it. There's a difference between being an employee of a company and failed versus the CEO who was responsible for that failure. The successes were great, but actually the lean startup came out of that failure. The failure was, in fact, in that company, the biggest reason for failure was hubris. It's has roots in a Greek word, which basically says you believe your own bullshit. I mean, I was able to raise lots of money, great press. We were going to Hollywood meet Silicon Valley.
Big thanks to our friends at WorkOS for helping us make these videos happen for the next generation of founders. Picture this, you've built your product, got your first customers, and now an enterprise wants to buy. Huge moment for your team until their IT team sends over the checklist. SSO, SCIM, directory sync, audit logs, a bunch of work for you to be enterprise ready. The good news, you don't need months of engineering work to get there. You can just use WorkOS, the fastest path to become enterprise ready and unlocking your growth. I've used it myself for years, and the world's best companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, and Cursor all run on WorkOS. You can get started with literally 1 prompt to your coding agent and never worry about authentication again. And the best part, your first 1 million monthly active users are completely free. Check them out at opencompany.cloud/WorkOS.
But we made shitty games. But the press said we were geniuses. And I was generating the press. And so if you believe your own stuff, and I had learned all the lessons about getting out of the building, but in this company I completely forgot them and just believed we could do no wrong. And people who were actually building real video games, raising a fraction of the money, were pissed. It was, how do these guys do all this stuff? And the answer was, we had a reality distortion field, but we didn't have any products that were worth warm spit. And here's what's interesting, is I kind of went through the 12 stages of grief. And I was telling you that the lean came from this failure. You know, first I was depressed, then I was angry. Then I blamed my co-founders. Gee, they were responsible for game development. They should have known. Then I looked at my business card again with the ones I didn't burn, and it said CEO. Well, I don't care who else, I was responsible. And I should have been paying attention. So I took some ownership. But the really interesting, and most people stop there. If you get to that, then that's great. But I started, and this is how lean came about, I started thinking about lessons learned. Not just, gee, I owned it, but what is it that I used to do that I forgot that I should have been doing again? And that was all about getting out of the building, informing vision, listening rather than hubris, etc. And a good chunk of lean came from that.
When I was listening to you, I immediately started mapping some of the traits you described to also building companies, which sometimes also feel like a mission impossible, where you take 100%. The chance for a big outcome with small likelihood of success if you just look at it from a pure analytical perspective, like from the statistics. How does this map to your experience with building companies, as you've done many now already? Where do you draw the connection?
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. So at least that's the way I do build companies. There's different ways to build companies. There's also different sports, right? So the question is, what type of sport are you competing in, and what type of sports are you good in? I'm not a sprinter. I'm not very fast, but I'm endurant. So I know that's my strength. So I didn't never build a company and 2 years later was a unicorn. It's just not me. And that's okay. That's just not me, and other people can do it, and that's also fine. It's a different sport. So I'm just not in that sport. So you may want to think about where you want to be and what you're strong at. So arguably, that I'm bad at these sports, but then I'm good at other sports. So I'm good at endurance sports. And just like you said, building a company usually, apart from these occasional flashes where everything falls in place and you're just in the right time, right space, and money's going your way, in most cases it's not as glamorous, it's more arduous, and in most cases it's not going the way you thought it would be going. So you have to pivot, and it's painful. You have to tell your investors you're not quite building what you promised them to build, and your team, and maybe you have to change your team or do things differently, and that's painful because it's not just a straight line, right? But as I said, it's not just enduring pain or being perseverant, but it's also to learn and adapt from it. And that's, I think, what you do in endurance sports as much as in entrepreneurship, that you kind of come through this stronger, and also you come in the right place. And ultimately, there's a way to win through attrition because others give up. In our industry, I've seen over the last 15 years, probably, I don't want to say 1,000, but at least 500 gay apps that started in this time. There's currently 4 left, and it's an attrition game, right? So who just was willing to stick around and stay around, and many just gave up and moved on, and it's fine. I'm not judging it, but obviously in that particular discipline, that wouldn't get you to the finish line.
So today you're 29. You raised from some of the best investors in the world, like ACC, that a lot of founders that are young really dream of doing one day. You have a team of more than 100 people. But obviously, there was a journey in your life to kind of get to this point from growing up in Germany. Like, what's that story?
I think the biggest story is consistency. Like in school, I always had good grades, but never the best grades, right? And what I learned from my parents, who they are Croatians and immigrants in Germany. My mom was a nurse, my dad was a mechanic. They always said, like, hey, put in the work. Right? Just be consistent, and it compounds. It was really amazing. It was like the biggest blessing I've gotten from them is an hour more than, you don't need to kind of work till midnight, right? Do an hour more. An hour more over 2, 3, 5, 10 years freaking compounds. And that always stuck with me. I think that's what just like happened also like with startups. My first startup was when I was 15. We did event management. Then when I was 18, I did a social enterprise in Uganda. Then another with 19. Then I did a government tech company when I was 21, which got acquired by the German White House, the German Federal Chancellery, Bundeskanzleramt. And you see like, you just like keep going, and it just like compounds, and your muscles grow and you become powerful. And so I don't believe in luck. I believe just like in consistency, and at some point you get lucky.
Very motivational words.
People
should listen,
Well, it's true. Like I literally am not like a visionary that comes up with stuff, etc. Actually, there's 2 types of leaders. One is the Steve Jobs type of leaders, what I call like, they know what they want to do, Elon Musk, they have this vision. And the other one I call Charles Darwin, person that explores, that finds things, that stumbles upon, that listens. I think I'm the explorer versus the visionary. And I think both lead to success.
Also, I had this, I think, from a YC partner a while ago, which is that startups are actually a thing you can really figure out if you just do the steps, if you just do the work, if you just talk to the people, if you iterate. And then there's quite a predictable path actually to making something people want. It might take years, right? But in the end, it's just about this consistency, I think, and showing up. So this is encouraging, I think, for many. When did you start Lumos? And how was this founding story like? How?
Yeah, we started Lumos. I mean, Lumos went through a lot of iterations. We started officially when COVID started in 2020, right? But we went out of stealth only mid 2022. So it's been a long time. It's been took us 2.5 years to actually launch the actual product. COVID happened. We were bored. I was at Stanford at that point with my 2 co-founders, and we started hacking. And then we were thinking about, what access do I actually have as a consumer? Because they have my data. My data is everywhere. I want to know what access I have. So we did a lot of interviews, and then suddenly one said, I work in security. I want to know that for my company, not for myself. And so we just stumbled upon it by starting to hack in our dorm rooms when COVID hit.
Cool. Typical. So were the first things you built? Were a few different things you were building, and then one thing stuck? What was that like?
So first of all, that's what I love about Silicon Valley. So when we met Andreessen Horowitz for the first time, Joel De La Garza, he was like, oh, interesting what you do here. I don't really care about the idea, but you have an interesting mind. Let me introduce you to 4 people. I was like, wait, what I just presented to you is a piece of crap. It doesn't mean anything. Why do you want me to introduce me to the security officer at Uber, security officer at LinkedIn? It's you'll figure it out. So it's very paid forward, right? And then honestly, I had 30 interviews a week. And once you have 30 interviews a week over, 20 interviews a week, over 2 years, that is hours and hours of just my ML mechanism in here put things together, and things just pop up sometimes in that way. And then when first customers say, wow, this is awesome, and it works, and they want more, and you feel some pull, then you know you stumbled upon something. And it took us, for example, 2.5 years.
How was the story for your first company? How did these details really feel to you? Were there difficult choices you had to make? Or were the struggles? What were the really early days, the first encounters for you on that journey?
Yeah, well, the first company that I started was a film production company, and my father is a film producer. So it kind of came pretty natural to me just to do that during high school and start just producing first music videos for friends of mine who were making music like I was. And those were my first experiences. So I started to experiment a little bit with video, and I figured out at that time that you could actually send a video to someone and they would probably pass that on to a friend via email, and then you could track the email addresses. And they would send it on to more friends if the video was just good enough. And you would get more email address. And we're like, wow, this is actually cool. The better the video we produce, the more people will actually see it. So those were the first forms of virality. And that was so inspiring to me. And although that company never made much money, I was able to raise venture capital. And that was in 2005, so a long time ago. And at that time, 5 million euros was a lot of money. And I raised that money, and we went out and we built a social network. And the social network was basically built around that hypothesis that at some point, media will be consumed in social media. That was a very visionary hypothesis at that time. But it turns out this is exactly what happened, right? And we figured out that we can't make it when we had burned 4. So we had 1 million in the bank. And our investors and us together, we said, this is not going to work. So we returned the money, and they gave me a job. They said, hey, why don't you just work for us? You did everything you could. We saw you worked really hard. You did it in a fair way. Didn't work out. That's fine. And they gave me a job, and that was the first time I came here, because that job was here. And we really enjoyed being here, and I really loved the life here. A lot of these things that we've done were just super cool experiences. And that was the beginning of it. The next thing I did then was I actually didn't start that company. I was an early employee at a video games company. And that video games company was built around the hypothesis that at some point people will pay for virtual items in video games. Because at that time, if you wanted to play a video game, you would have to buy a €60, $60 box and install it on your PC. And we had seen in Asia how people were actually playing video games for free and just doing in-app purchases. That was before Farmville, before everything. And we were like, this is a really interesting business model, because in the end we can sell as many of them as we want to, because they're basically just entries in a database. And so that was a great experience for us. And the company became pretty successful. And it was the first time that it gave me a little bit of money, especially after we sold it to a large TV channel. to start playing a little bit more with it and taking a little bit more risk.
You also studied in New York for a bit, right? What was that journey like?
Yeah, I mean, I studied CS. I went to Columbia, which is a university and college in New York City. Honestly, I never asked myself the question, what was I going to study in college? I just love computers and coding, and so I just kept doing that, and it became my major. And I went to college basically 96 to 2000. So during like the heyday of the first internet bubble, which in some ways was more crazy than what's happening right now, because it felt like what's happening with AI, it felt like it was going to change the world, but people were very optimistic about how it would lead us to a really good place. Yeah, so I studied CS, and then as I was my last year, basically 2 of my professors started a company, and I just started working for them. And then that just was my first job out of college, and the job was a disaster. It was a company with no business model. So we built basically a chat client that would push news to you. You know, at the time, there were no smartphones, so you get text messages about like a football team or a basketball team that you cared about, like pushed to you. And we had 10,000 plus users, but there was no monetization whatsoever. So as soon as the internet bubble crashed, basically the company ran out of money, and then I started consulting for another startup, and it was the same thing. It clearly wasn't a real business, and I became honestly depressed about tech. And so I went to grad school because I didn't know what else to do. And then very quickly was like, hey, I don't want to be an engineer. There's something that doesn't feel right about this career. Let me go do something else. So I actually went to law school.
Wow, okay.
So
a change.
Yeah, it was a big change. You know, I started working for a law firm, and basically a year in, I woke up and I was like, what am I doing? I love building and creating things, and I love the law, but I wasn't, like you said earlier, it's easy when you do something that comes naturally to you.
It's like play to you.
Yeah, it wasn't that. And I'd been coding on the side for fun for the 4 years that I'd been basically either in law school or a lawyer, but as a hobby. I didn't think of it as a career anymore. And so I quit my law job, and then one of my best friends was building a company in finance, and he needed someone to build some software for him. And I just started working with him and building software, and I started loving it more and more and more. And I did that for a few years. And then I was like, hey, actually, this is what I need to do for the rest of my life. I'm here to build things for people. Why don't I move to Silicon Valley? I need to go do it for the best. And so my feeling was I need to move to Silicon Valley. I got very lucky. A friend of mine knew someone who was an early engineer at Dropbox. And Dropbox at the time did this thing where they had a hack week, but they would invite maybe 20 external people to join into the hack week. And then they would give you a laptop and let you in the code base, and you could build things on top of Dropbox for the hack week. So my friend managed to get me invited, and so I coded for 5 days with a bunch of Dropboxers. And at the end of it, they were like, hey, why don't you interview, and maybe you can get a job here. And and I interviewed, and I actually didn't get a job. And they were like, well, we're not sure you're good enough. But they're like, why don't you do a long take home? So they gave me another take home. I did the take home, and then they were like, we'll take a shot at you. Yeah, and I joined Dropbox, and it was, I moved from New York to California, and I never looked back. Yeah, it was incredible.
If you made it to this part in the video, thank you so much for watching and helping us grow this channel. If you're not subscribed, make sure to hit the subscribe button right below. It helps us reach bigger guests and make more quality content for you guys out there.